Well, we're going to keep moving here, and we want to move towards some important events happening as it concerns the ongoing solidarity movement with Palestine that is sweeping the globe, but certainly here in North America very, very strongly. And we are very, very honored to be joined once again by Yara Shoufani, who is a member of the Palestinian Youth Movement, to talk more about this. Yara, as always, thanks so much for being with us.
Thanks so much for having me on.
Well, great to have you here. And, we've been talking with yourself and other members of PYM, over this whole thing about this whole time, this whole 7 months about this massive movement. I mean, we've seen the largest Palestine protest in the history of America, the largest Palestine protest in the history of Canada. We've seen huge shifts politically in every way. We've seen the student encampments. I won't go on and on and on, but I say that to say that in Detroit and in just a couple weeks, I think at the end of May, the 24th through the 26th, there's going to be the People's Conference for Palestine. So tell us where a conference fits in this broader arc of solidarity and resistance and protest that we've seen here in the U.S. and in Canada and, of course, around the world.
Yeah, I mean, I think maybe if we had this conversation 3 weeks ago, I would have started right away with the conference. But just to say that, the resurgence that we're seeing in the Palestine movement right now within the student movement has also kind of shaken the world in so many ways. Over the course of the last 2 weeks, we have seen student encampments popping up in over 150 universities. And really what we're seeing here is the student movement re-energizing the Palestinian national liberation struggle in a very needed way. As you all know, we've entered, I think now month 7, or we've entered month 8 of the genocide against the Palestinian people, which has claimed over 40,000 lives, has wreaked havoc and destruction on Gaza, and we've seen different peaks and waves in the broader solidarity movement across the world. Back in November, we saw hundreds of thousands of people gather in DC, and then later in Ottawa, Canada, and all across the world weekly as well. But just a surge in mass mobilizations, which really showed us that the masses of people across the world stand with Palestine. And then, just a few months later, we saw coordinated shut it down actions really, really take over not only the United States, but Canada and Europe, which showed us that people are not only willing to engage in mass mobilizations, but that they're willing to actually challenge and shut down halls of power, areas where capitalism and imperialism are at their most concrete. And it showed us that people across the world are ready to take risks and do so much in order to try to stop this war and in order to be part of an anti-imperialist struggle that is being built or rebuilt, perhaps is a better word here, around Palestine. And the last few weeks have shown us the role that students can play and must play in this struggle. From the first encampment that was launched at Columbia University, which was violently repressed by the NYPD, only to then drive even more energy into the movement and to result in not only Columbia University rebuilding its encampment, but also many, many encampments, over 150 that would follow. And I think that now is the time and is the most important time for us to convene across different areas of the movement in order to discuss the developments of the last 7 months, in order to strategize on the next few months, but also not only the next few months, but the future of the Palestine movement. And this is part of a really, really long history for Palestinians. We, as Palestinians, have convened regularly in moments of crisis, actually dating back before the Nakba, the catastrophe, which was the mass exodus and forced exile of over 750,000 Palestinians on May 15th, 1948, which we are just a few days from commemorating yet again. But even before the Nakba, Palestinians were convening popular conferences and mass conferences, from the first Arab Women's Congress in October 26, 1929, to the Youth Conference in December 1932, and so many more, which actually laid the foundation, or helped lay the foundation for the Great Peasant Revolution of 1936 to 1939, where Palestinians were so close to, bringing British Empire to its knees and defeating Zionist colonization. And then we saw, yet another really important conference take place on October 18th, 1975, which was, the largest public gathering of Palestinians inside the Zionist entity since 1948 in Nazareth. And this conference helped lay the foundation for what is now commemorated as Land Day. And so, really, conferences have had this long history in the Palestinian struggle. And of course, beyond the Palestinian struggle, we know global South movements have also used conferences as a way to convene revolutionary forces and to help drive forward new stages of revolution. And so on May 24th to 26th, the Palestinian Youth Movement, alongside over 14 other co-conveners, including National Students for Justice in Palestine, Al-Auda, the Palestinian Feminist Collective, the People's Forum, Answer Coalition, and many others are going to be coming together in Detroit in order to continue this revolutionary tradition of conferences playing a role in re-energizing revolutionary struggle.
I want to ask you about the re-energizing, just to elaborate on that a bit, because you mentioned that you've got the student movement in the West, essentially, re-energizing Palestinians abroad. So can you explain what you mean by that? Because I find it a really interesting way to look at it in a sort of like synergy on a global scale of what we see happening with the solidarity movement for Palestine.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting reflecting on the last 7 months, and there have been, we talk about the heightening of contradictions, right? That this is a moment where it is so clear who the enemy is and who our friends are, right? And that we're building this mass movement that has such a level of political clarity. But of course, as is the case with a genocide that is, waging on for such a long period of time, that is wreaking so much destruction and despair and misery across, not only within Palestine, but also across the world. We've seen at various points in this, um, demoralization. We have seen, if I compare the level of political clarity we might have had in November and December, when it felt like there's nothing that we couldn't accomplish, when we were able to convene, millions of people across the world regularly. And then, of course, as the genocide continued and as we saw the levels of destruction in Gaza, we started to see more despair within the movement, right? And this despair, of course, of how is it that we have the world behind us and yet we can't end this genocide, right? And the student movement, I think, over the last 3 weeks has really kind of given us hope yet again. And we've seen that in even messages that Palestinians are delivering to the student movement in the West, right? Which is, I think, what you're alluding to, Rania, that there's this kind of hope that we're seeing even of Palestinians back home. I mentioned Colombia earlier, and one of the, I think, most moving things that took place in Colombia, as we saw, was the occupation of Hamilton Hall and its renaming of Hamilton Hall to Hind's Hall, in honor of Hind, who is a young girl that was martyred in Gaza. And just a few days ago, I was watching a clip of Hind's mother referencing this renaming, right? And so we're seeing the way in which the student movement is actually bringing or returning levels of political clarity, and showing us or reminding us that, yes, even month 7 into this genocide, that people are still with Palestine, that we are still ready to sacrifice so much for Palestine, that students are, occupying spaces on their campuses not only to call for divestment, but also to call for an end to genocide, not only to centralize the role of the student movement in revolutionary struggle, but also to connect the student movement with the mass movement that we've been seeing built over the last 7 months. And so there's this really kind of incredible resurgence that we're seeing at a moment where I think we were starting to see that level of despair within the movement that is only natural when you've witnessed your people subject to genocide for 7 months, and that despite organizers all across the world pouring their hearts and souls into the struggle, sacrificing so much, personal sacrifices, and so much more, right? Professional sacrifices and so on, and still not being able to end the genocide. And it's natural that we would see levels of despair kind of, arise. And so seeing the student movement's ability to kind of re-energize us, to bring that political clarity back into the movement, not to say that it was gone, but we saw segments of it slipping away, is really, really critical. And I think that this conference aims to do exactly that, right? To, on the one hand, convene the masses on a popular level to raise consciousness, right? We've seen people, develop political clarity around the need for a ceasefire, for example, and we've seen people enter the movement for the first time who, had perhaps no position on the Palestinian struggle from all sectors of society. And now is the time for us to take that commitment, to take that consciousness and turn it into long-term political organization, long-term political struggle, and offer a level of political clarity that is needed to allow for us to continue this long battle ahead. And so that's, I think, one of the critical goals of the conference. Another, of course, is to advance the role of political organization. We've seen people from all walks of life enter political organization for the first time. Sectors are organizing around Palestine, whether it be within healthcare, within education, within labor. All kinds of people from all walks of life are starting to see that they need to build political organizations that are capable of fighting Zionism and imperialism long term. And so this conference aims to bring these sectors together and bring these new organizers, these new revolutionaries together in order to pledge a long-term commitment to the Palestinian struggle, and in order to expose and continue to expose Zionism and the U.S. administration's ongoing role in this genocide. And so that's why the conference is actually focused on three tracks. One is the student movement. The other is the track which is called the Battle of Ideas, focused on the role of ideological struggle, the raising of consciousness that we've seen all across the globe over the last 7 months. The third is building power in the heart of empire, confronting Zionism and imperialism. So really kind of showing that we in the belly of the beast have a critical role to play. And then the last, which I already kind of alluded to, is the track 4, which is mobilizing to organizing. So again, really trying to think about, if we, earlier I referenced that conferences have a history in Palestine dating over 100 years ago. So we know that the Palestinian struggle is a long-term struggle that we've been fighting for 100 years. And to prepare to fight for as long as needed, even if it's another 100 years, we need to be prepared to build political organizations that are capable of not only mobilizing people, but organizing people as well.
Mm-hmm. No, well, important point. And just quickly before I ask you one final question, Yara, since we're talking about the student movement, I do have some breaking news here. Xavier University of Louisiana, which is one of the most storied historically black colleges and universities in the United States, has canceled the commencement speech of Linda Thomas Greenfield on Saturday because students had said that they did not want her to come. And I guess they didn't want a big protest. So they have now canceled. She will no longer be there. The president said he didn't want to do it, but, they had no choice. The student body president had actually written to the administrators and said, none of us want this to happen. So just another example of how this is an ongoing movement that's continuing to spread in every corner. So some breaking news there out of Xavier University in New Orleans. Well, before we let you go, Yara, where can people find out more about this conference if they would like to be a part of it?
Yeah, so people can go to People's Conference for Palestine, or if you search People's Conference for Palestine, or the exact website is peoplesconferenceforpalestine.org, and you can register there. We have plenty of exciting speakers that are coming, and it's going to be a 3-day long collaborative and political and cultural kind of experience that brings all segments of the movement together. And you can register online through the conference website. All of the registration fees are going to Gaza Aid directly. And this is actually part of, it's also a political decision that the co-conveners of the conference have made in honor of something that we call in Arabic ta'ziz al-samud, which means supporting the steadfastness of our people. And so all conference registration fees will be going towards Gaza Aid, and we've already actually raised 100,000 for Gaza through this conference, through the registration fees. And this is part of, I think, our role in the FAR diaspora to be able to act as a cradle and a popular base for our people's struggle, to support their steadfastness, and to get organized, to come together and to convene and strategize for the long battle ahead. And so you can find information on how to register, on accommodation, and all of the information that you need for the conference at peoplesconferenceforpalestine.org.
Mm-hmm. Yara Shoufani with the Palestinian Youth Movement. As always, thanks so much for giving us some of your time here on the Freedom Side.
Thanks so much for having me on.